So without further ado, gents, what did we make of the budget yesterday? I mean, it's not quite such a big event as it used to be because we know a little bit about what was coming, or we've had a leak or two, it's fair to say, isn't it? So, Edward, from your point of view, I mean, maybe before you get in, just tell us a bit about your role and your specialism.
Okay, well, I'm a lawyer. I'm with Lanyon Bowdler, work in private clients, so that's probate, wills, tax, trusts. So that's my line, and I guess there isn't really much to take away for me in what I do from what we heard yesterday. But the takeaway personally for me is a kind of bigger picture, macro overview, if you like, which is that it's as much as what there wasn't there yesterday as what there was, and that's that we're heading, it seems to me, into territory where it's big state over the course of the next few years. You know, in 5 years' time, I think it's 5 years' time, on the projections from the commentary I've seen, we're looking at having biggest tax take out of the GDP as a proportion since the days of the early 1950s Clement Attlee government. So maybe as we move into November and we're all inspired to grow our moustaches in November, we should all be growing our little Clem the Gent moustaches and putting on Homburgs. But happy days.
Well, because if the cost of living goes too far, we won't be able to afford shaving foam anyway, will we?
Indeed, or razor blades.
Exactly. Paul, from your point of view, I mean, I guess you also, you know, some of the areas that you specialise in, there wasn't a huge amount in the budget. Do you find yourself, when you hear a budget like this, pouring for the small print? Because they always say the devil's in the detail, don't they? And
that's absolutely the case, and I think increasingly, Carl, the Chancellor just tends to announce the good news stories in the speech, and it's looking at the press releases afterwards that tend to sort of throw up any interesting little issues. And there were some interesting things from a tax geek's point of view, like myself, but you know, in the grand scheme of things, there isn't a lot in there from a tax point of view, and a little bit like Edward said, I think really it does leave you sort of thinking what was more important was what wasn't in there than what was. Every budget that I can remember, and that's a lot of budgets, we've talked about capital gains tax changes, and you know, fortunately, I think from this perspective, that there weren't any major tax changes in the budget this year, because I think if there were, it was only likely to be rates going up and reliefs being taken away. So in a sense, it was kind of, I sat there listening to the end, hoping for some exciting detail, but actually in the end was quite relieved when there wasn't any. So.
What about you, Nick? What did you think about yesterday's budget?
It's not unusual to have a raft of articles leading up to any sort of budget or any sort of announcement and anticipation of what's going to come in. And in the personal financial planning and business financial planning world, pensions have been massively under the spotlight. Tax reliefs, if things are getting tighter going forward, you know, there's some easy, quick wins that reduce the amount of relief that you get on your pension contributions, either through the business or personally, because it can be seen to be quite generous for high earners. That's been left alone again, so it's a sigh of relief. It's another opportunity for people to make up those missed contributions maybe, or maximise things if they've made money within their businesses and are trying to get it out tax efficiently. And it's a trick that some business people are always reluctant to take because they don't really understand the pensions opportunities. But because it was left alone, again, it's open season and it's game on to carry on with that good old-fashioned planning, which is great. So as the guys have said, you know, that was anticipated there'd be big changes, but didn't seem to be much. And I was like Paul, trying to download all the details ready for today, and couldn't find much.
I think you missed a page of the PDF.
60 odd pages in, I was thinking this is just as it was spoken earlier.
Yes.
There wasn't really that thing that had been missed.
I guess one of the reasons though is if they're looking to try and get the economy back on some kind of level footing, that there's a feeling among the Chancellor, well, don't mess with things I don't need to mess with now. And I mean, in your area, a lot of that would fall into that category, wouldn't it?
It would do, yeah. There's a fine line between tinkering with things because you can, and then trying to reclaim a lot of tax because we've spent a lot of money getting us out of the situation we've been in. So we've always, the unknown is the anticipation, and people have quite generous lump sums tax-free from pension pots, and that's always been can you take your quarter going forward? So people with money in pensions already, they think, oh, I'll maybe take it now because that's going to change next week, and you never really know until the time. But if they had, then now they could be regretting it. So it's always worth waiting until the detail comes through, really. And normally there's not a change immediately that says, okay, from midnight tonight. It's normally there's a 6-month or a 12-month period, and lots of the changes that are coming through are timelined for a point in the future. So you've still got a chance.
Edward, do you think there's an issue as well, though? I always find this, when things are announced in a budget, you're a little bit sceptical about, has that already been announced? Is this money that's already been allocated? Has it come out of a pot that we already know about or not?
Oh, no, absolutely, and the timing of it as well. So the announcement on the national living wage, I think it's called now, because it wasn't minimum wage, but I think it's subtly changed its name. So that was heralded, wasn't it? But that isn't happening till the 1st of April, I think I'm right in saying. And of course, we've all forgotten that we had a budget in March where they announced, changes to that, from last 1st of April. So there are things that have happened already. There's things that are going to happen in the future. We had the tax increases in March. We had a tax increase just over a month ago, didn't we? Because of the national insurance contribution. So, is this the big event? Is Budget Day the big thing? Especially when you have 2 in a year.
And that, I guess, Paul, is one of the reasons why you have to put the jigsaw together with things that have been announced yesterday, with some of these things in March. You say you've got national insurance going up. So it seemed to me that the Chancellor thought, well, OK, the economy's doing a bit better than had been predicted earlier in the year, so I've got more tax revenue. So that means I can splash some of it around. But does that offset some of the things that he announced in March where he's going to be taking it back?
I mean, I think the measures in March were quite targeted. I think, and certainly, if you look at, for example, people who are on universal credit, and we had the reduction of the tape of universal credit to make work pay more. You then look at that to say, well, that doesn't compensate for the fact that they're taking away the increase that kind of came through as a consequence of COVID, and it only really benefits about a third of the people who are on universal credit. So you're absolutely right, Carl. It's really picking the threads in between the individual messages and really trying to make sure that you do look at the big picture. What's happened previously? What do we think is going to happen down the line? And well, as Nick says, pouring over pages and pages of detail for that one thing that you think potentially is a bit of a game changer. So it's an exciting day from a tax person's point of view, certainly. But you do tend to find you're trying to assemble that jigsaw and and pull all the threads together before you try and give a coherent message to clients about what the real impact is. Because if you just react to the speech, quite often you're in danger of giving a really quite a skewed picture versus what comes through over the following couple of days.
So you can only respond to the bits that have actually been delivered in the Commons, can't you?
You can, and a lot of the speech is talking about giveaways. It's talking about so many new hospitals. It's talking about so many of these, so many of that. Having the focus on the first 1,001 days of a child's life and all of that stuff, and all great things, but lots of things that have been damaged over the years. So one was putting back things that maybe shouldn't have been cut back quite so sharply. So there's a lot of putting things right as well as looking forward and things positive. But you're right, if you just look at it and get caught up in the emotion of the event itself, it seems very much a bit of one-upmanship from the one side of the house and how well we're doing, because actually we took steps in during COVID, and now we've recovered stronger, so we're able to be more giving with the tax that's come in. The other side that I picked up as well was the inflation that's going to be shorter term is going to be quite high, probably not up to 6% they were expecting. They're talking about 4% now. The office the OBR reports coming through, but what they don't necessarily talk about is it raising an interest rates and how that works, and the effect of people who are sitting with money in cash at the moment and
they want
and are
interest rates
losing
to go
out.
up, don't
Absolutely,
they? So,
yeah. We've got lots of clients who've got lots of money in cash, and they've got lots of money with us invested, which is actually getting some proper growth, but they still need rainy day money that we don't invest, and we do have set on one side for purchases and for short-term needs, and that's just definitely losing money against inflation.
We did a bit of an overview, really, didn't we? But I thought maybe the most sensible thing to do now is just boil down on some of the. I know Paul said there's not a huge amount, but I've got a long list here. Look at this, I've got a long list of things to talk about. One of which is education, and education sort of broadens out into the whole skills and recruitment agenda, doesn't it? Really, Nick? I mean, sort of the sort of. Not just financial education, I guess, from your point of view. We've spoken about that in the studio before. Yeah. But the whole, where do you stand on what the budget and the government is doing for educators and education at the moment?
There does need to be a joined-up approach, and it does seem to be lots of interaction with agencies like the FSB and like the Marches Growth Hub, and those sort of people tying up with sixth forms and with educators to get people work ready almost, and make sure that they're fit for the job, but also that they've got the aspirations and an awareness of what the job needs to be. So it is a two-sided thing. And it does seem to be that there's funding available for more of that and extensions of existing programmes. You know, the Kickstarter scheme's been quite good to get lots of people that didn't have that great prospects before now with better prospects. And there's some great young people who've been introduced into businesses and workplaces that have been kept on, and that's been a success story. And Shropshire and the community have been instrumental in a lot of that and set up a new media centre on the side of the football ground, specifically with people with those sorts of roles in mind, really. So it's been a great success. So it's great to see that that's going to continue rather than just be stopped.
And Paul, I mean, one of the things that came out of the budget was a revelation that at one point we thought unemployment might hit over 12%, wasn't it? And now they think it's going to be about 5.5%. So, which is one of the reasons, I guess, the Chancellor says he's more optimistic and has got some more money to spend. But that brings its own skills issues as well, doesn't it? When you,
I think it absolutely does, Carl. I think if probably every single business that I talk to at the moment is saying it's really hard to find good, skilled people. I think, you know, it's one thing to say we want higher paid jobs for people in this country, but we still need those people to actually want to do those jobs irrespective of what they're paid for them. We still need those people to have the skills in order to be able to do that. And I think, you know, the piece around education and schools is great, but as Nick says, it needs to be that joined up approach that sort of takes it forward into equipping people who are currently unemployed with the skills to enable them to fill some of the jobs that we want to get that really high skilled economy that the Chancellor is very keen for us to develop. You know, as a business, we're seeing a bit of a challenge around recruiting really good people. I think probably it's the same for these guys as well. And the question has to be, how do we help the people who are currently unemployed who don't have the skills necessary to fill those roles? How do we take them to that point where they are able to? You've got things like the apprenticeship levy, which I think is a great scheme, but probably in truth still underutilised.
do you think some companies don't really understand the benefits of that, though, do they?
I think they absolutely do. I think the certainly smaller businesses will tend to think because they don't pay the apprenticeship levy, that because their payroll isn't, you know, big enough in order to sort of fit above the threshold, they may well be thinking they can't then benefit from it. But the reality is there's a pool of money there that is available to them in order to be able to fund a lot of the training that an apprenticeship, the thing is that 90% of the training can get covered by the apprenticeship levy now. So I think there's a pool, I think there's still an awareness campaign. There's a big issue there around helping smaller businesses to understand that, yeah, actually this funding is there available to them. They can use it to sort of take people, you know, it links to the Kickstarter as well, the opportunity to bring people in and train them and actually give them a genuine career and give them the skills to fill the sort of gaps that, you know, every business seems to be facing at the moment. So I think it's not that, I think it again, going back to what Nick said, it's that joined up approach. It's pulling all of the levers that are available and making sure there is that awareness amongst businesses that they are able to take advantage of what's there, because it's frankly criminal if there's funding available that businesses aren't using simply because they just don't know that it's there.
And Adrian, I mean, Lanyon Bowdler's expanding right now, isn't it? I mean, you're actively looking, recruiting staff, so I guess you're right front and centre of this debate at the moment, aren't you?
We are. We're growing, but it's there are all kinds of challenges, not just the growing. It's the big change since COVID has been businesses, firms in Birmingham or Manchester, you know, not in our locality, who are now in a position, because they've experienced how it works through a pandemic, to offer people the chance to work completely remotely. Now, I'm sceptical, and about you guys, I'm sceptical about how that actually works, you know, in a law firm and in lots of businesses, the reality of that and whether the promise that's being held out is actually going to be the reality of it. But that's a big challenge. But you know, the Chancellor seems to get the whole skills thing and how important that is, that it's not just talk. I'm not sure whether Boris, I'm going to get political, but I'm not sure whether Boris does. He came out, didn't he, quite recently, and he said something that to me sounded like it was just, well, you businesses, it's your job to fix all this. You know, if prices are all rising, you businesses, you just need to pay more, and that will fix everything. It doesn't work quite like that, does it? That's not the reality of it. You know, yes, you want people to be earning more, you want to pay more, but that's got to be part of a high skills economy, and we need to develop that, and we need to be joined up about how we do that.
Do you think Shropshire is getting what it needs to play its role in what was mentioned several times yesterday, this levelling up idea, the fact that
Just seen
what
the
actually
list.
is levelling up?
Yeah, before I came in, I checked the list for local areas, and there isn't anywhere local. There's nowhere within Shropshire that's included in the first, is it 100 places that have been revealed today? And for the £4.8 billion pot, it's a big pot. If it's used wisely, it can do some great things. But it doesn't seem to be coming to us, whether that's not been put forward or whether it's not been accepted, I don't know.
Because it's not for a lack of projects that would, whether it's how long have we been campaigning for things like the electrification of the rail link, for example, which opens up all sorts of other things and ticks boxes with green transport and things like that, doesn't it? So do you feel like, gents, we're being levelled up correctly or not?
I think it feels like the county is a bit of a Cinderella county in that sense. I think whether there's a perception that actually, it's a rural county and there's plenty of wealth in Shropshire and therefore it doesn't need to be on the list. I don't know. It's really difficult to understand because there are great projects. There are people who would really benefit from that. And it just seems like, a colleague of mine's from Stoke-on-Chentham was shouting from the rooftops during the speech yesterday because Stoke got a name check. Where's
Didn't he say not one, not two, but
three
three or
different
something?
areas.
wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not decrying Stoke at all. I'm sure it's a fantastic place. But it's sort of from my point of view, we don't seem to have the profile that attracts that sort of attention, and I really can't put my finger on why.
The pure fact that the government obviously sees the importance of name checking some of these places in a speech like the budget debate, Edward, I guess, shows how they realise that they've got to be seen to be sharing out the cake to everywhere, don't they?
Well, you hope so. I don't know where are all the marginals. That's the thing, or the red wall.
Or the red wall.
We're not really. Are we red? We're not really red wall, are
No,
we? So
true.
that's going to be a focus, isn't it? Where are we? We're 3 years away from an election. Well, we have to have an election within almost 3 years, don't we? So yeah. I've just come in on the electrification point. Of course, that brings us neatly onto the air passenger levy, doesn't it? So we're all, because none of us are going to use trains anymore for our internal UK travel, are we? We're all going to hop on the plane now. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, travel, and of course, and I know, Paul, you were very keen to talk about the maritime development in the budget as well, weren't you? That got you really excited yesterday.
Absolutely. Tonnage tax for all of those Shropshire businesses with their fleet of ships.
The largest landlocked county in Britain needs to know about this.
It was a
don't we?
real highlight from my point of view, Carl. Absolutely.
Shropshire merchant movie.
Well, you never know. The Mirror at Ellesmere might come in handy like this. We've had a couple of comments on social media, gents. One talking about the chat we were having a few minutes ago about levelling up and how that all works. John says, in my opinion, levelling up only works for those who make the case to need to be more level than others. It's maybe a more direct way, but that's the sort of thing about you saying about us being low profile and maybe needing to shout a bit more about Shropshire, isn't it?
There's a lot to be, yeah. I think I'm 100% behind that view.
Let's talk about tax, business rates, that kind of area from the budget. Now, one of the big headlines yesterday was the Chancellor's decision, wasn't it, Chris, to have a look at tinker with the business rate system. What did we make of that one? This is your sort of field, isn't it, really, Paul?
I think there was some good stuff in there, absolutely. I think that the biggest ticket item and the most beneficial for me was the 50% cut for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. Obviously, those are the businesses that are still recovering from the pandemic, and I think everything that the Chancellor can do to sort of contribute towards that recovery, I think has got to be welcomed. I think there was also some good stuff there, chiming in with the green agenda around rates reductions where you invest in green tech, for example, encouraging infrastructure development by giving rates holidays where you improve buildings. There was a lot of, and I think it's probably fair to say, all credit to the Chancellor. He's not afraid to try different levers and make different changes, and actually quite imaginative in some of the tools that he actually uses to try and drive activity. So I think overall it was very positive. I think it absolutely makes sense in the current day and age to revalue every 3 years to make sure that the rates that businesses are paying are actually appropriate to the value of the property. So overall, I thought there was a lot of positives in that package.
50%. Well, I was going to say that 50% reduction. That's for a year. So that's
right.
2012, 2020. Where are we now? 2022,
Absolutely.
23, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and it with every possibility, I guess, depending on how the economy and those businesses
Yeah.
have performed, that it could be extended. I don't think it's a huge cost to the Treasury in truth, but I think it's a great benefit to an individual business that's saving them, cash where they really need that cash to keep the business going and go into the future.
Quite nice as well to have that timeline that okay, for at least 12 months, rather than it's extended until March or it's extended. Well, it's not really going to make much difference, but if you've got time for it to then be adapted into your business plan and that extra cash flow to be worked and then used however you need to, depending what sector you're in.
Although of course, I can't imagine for a minute our 2 local authorities in Shropshire would, say then they don't welcome the cut for the industry. But part of business rates actually comes directly to local authorities, doesn't it? So will they be actually sort of shortchanged as a result of this in terms of having the money?
There'll be a way of
coffers,
them reclaiming it from central pot, I should imagine.
Yeah, I would imagine there'll be a funding mechanism to ensure that the councils aren't losing out, because I think council spending's under pressure as it is at the moment anyway, isn't it? So
That's back to the devil's in the detail, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think picking up on that, although it's not local to us, but I think in Scotland, the local authorities don't have to pass that on because it's sort of like a direct grant, isn't it? So they have a decision about whether they're going to pass that on to the taxpayer or not.
They fund. So you're absolutely right, Edward. They fund central government in the devolved authorities, and then it's up to them how they actually utilise that funding. So.
What about some of the other big tax? The longest ever, I think, as we were just saying in the break here, the longest ever delivery over alcohol-related tax, and a huge revamp of that. I'm not looking directly at Nick because I know he likes football, but
Thanks,
it's your turn. What did you make of what he's done there?
Well, if you look at the very basics, it makes a lot of sense to go from 15 different tariffs to 6, and it makes sense if we're trying to get people healthier, if we're trying to encourage people to have a healthier lifestyle that then has a lesser impact on the NHS in the future, and all of that's great long-term planning to make more damaging drinks more expensive. That kind of makes sense. Interesting with the talk about the English sparkling wines now being levelled up. We've got back to levelling up, and that will help local businesses. We've got a great local vineyard, Henco's, not that far from here, and their Evolution product is fantastic. I'm not getting paid to advertise, but it's brilliant.
The little P's going to come out the bottom of the screen at this
absolutely, yeah, placements. Yeah. But it is a great product and should be recognised as such. And if that can be reduced in price, fantastic. But with the tinkering of this and that, and we were saying that normally you get 1p on a pint, or you get this on that, and it was a 15-minute probably just to explain what it was all about. But it does make sense to do that.
There's also, isn't there, the way I read it, is that there's a slight recalibration to make more of an incentive to not drink at home, to actually go and have a pint at your local pub and support your local hostelry.
The draft
draft beer, drinking in a safe environment.
That's what they said, wasn't it? Yeah.
Wonderful phrase. Not sure quite what it means, but maybe we're getting back to Clem Attlee and the days of warm beer and district nurses cycling around and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you're safer to drink in a pub than at home, apparently.
We'll all look forward to the small print that justifies that one, I think. But the broader issue about actually needing to support and protect local community facilities is massive, isn't it, in a county like Shropshire? It's huge. So.
Yeah, no, it's really important because and a lot of communities have come together and over the pandemic, and they've been looking out for neighbours, and they've had ways of making sure that everyone's okay, because not everyone's even been able to go out and go shopping and things. We spent time delivering prescriptions for people during lockdown for people that were shielding, and they hadn't left the house for 14 weeks. That's crazy, isn't it? And no other time in my lifetime have we experienced that, and hopefully never again. But there were people in the area that would just say, okay, just make sure if you need anything, just let know. And then if there are now areas that people can come together, and you've got the village halls and all of the communities, the assets, they're really important to protect and nurture, because it's a lot of people now know their neighbours much better than they ever did. Let's keep that going.
But as you were saying, Edward, with the sort of the issues that your sector would find in the fact that people can work from home, and so you're suddenly competing with people in London, Manchester, Birmingham, what have you, that the government's got to take into account the changes it needs to make to take into account the fact that people want to do far more from the comfort of their own homes.
They do, but I hope they're not all drinking at home. But they won't be now, will they? Because it'll be more expensive. But
not sherry, at least. It's sherry that's being used. Anybody drink sherry? Any sherry drinkers here? No.
Not that I'm prepared to admit
to. We've all got to take more account of that people want I said before, I don't think 100% working at home is really going to work very effectively. But we're all going to have to be a lot more flexible. That's what I think people want. They want the choice. They didn't like being forced to work from home 100% of the time. They want choice. That's what human beings want, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Were there any other taxation tinkers that jumped out at, from your point of view?
I think there was a really sort of positive change, so in terms of the extension of what's known as the annual investment allowance, which allows businesses to claim a full 100% tax deduction for capital expenditure that they make during the course of the year. Now, that was supposed to effectively go off a cliff at the end of the year, and I've now extended that until March 2023. Same trouble with Edward, sort of remembering what year we're in.
Is that up to £1 million?
It's up to a maximum of £1 million, and I think a lot of businesses are focused on what the Chancellor announced earlier in the year, the super deduction, which is kind of 130% value deduction for capital expenditure, but that only applied to companies and it only applied to brand new kit. So this is great news for businesses that are sole traders, that are partnerships, and that are looking at investing in second-hand kit. They can now, look at those investment plans with a degree more comfort that they're still going to get the tax benefits from that out into the future. It's just unfortunate we'd only just written an article on our website about the reduction in it, so thanks Mr Sunak.
See, I imagine from all three of you's perspective, budget day comes with a bit of dread that you suddenly discover you've then got to either react in the space of 30, 40 days to get your head around and communicate to clients some changes, reprint literature and all sorts of things like that. Do you almost breathe a sigh of relief if your specialist area is off the hook?
Yeah, there's two ways of looking at it. I mean, you could say that change brings us opportunities to help clients, but there is, and again, to your point, we've just printed a load of leaflets to say, if you sell a residential property and you make a capital gain, you've got to pay the tax in 30 days, and the Chancellor has just gone and extended it to 60. So again, he seems to have taken a bit of a vendetta against WR Partners' marketing team over the course. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah.
Support your local retailer, go and buy some tips. Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing.
I suppose where it gets exciting or interesting for us is you've got all the changes potentially that can come through. So you're having conversations with people about what might happen and trying to talk them out of doing anything just in case it happens. Yes. And then whenever the details are announced, it's then remembering the clients and their individual circumstances and what they now need to do or don't need to do. And that's the challenge when you've got quite a few clients you look after. Remembering, because we know them all and they're all in very different circumstances. And that's where the great relationship comes in, and then having that ongoing meeting situation and ongoing service like you guys provide. That we do as well, just to make sure that the plans that we originally had, whatever's gone on now, we've now going to tinker them maybe or maybe not, and is that still the objective going forward?
Well, they use people like you as their filter, don't they, really, to say, right, there's a huge document here, can you just tell me the bits that matter to me? Don't they?
Can you, this has happened, just give us the headlines, or is there anything I need to be aware of? Picking up on that point about changes, there are things that I can remember we've been talking about, well, this might change, and we've been talking about that every year before budget for years. Deeds of variation is something we do in our line, and every year since I qualified, we've been, well, it might change, it could be this year. I mean, and it never does, but it could do.
Now, guys, let's just do a roundup then of what we're doing. Your thoughts then, your final thoughts, Nick?
Final thoughts, I suppose really from the financial planning perspective, there were no huge changes. There's been some tweaks over the years. Last 2015, 16, huge pension changes that a lot of people haven't got their head around yet. So seek advice about that. It's not just about a budget and about maybe an autumn statement, or maybe it's more about your own personal plan. What do I want to do by when? And then get some advice from somebody that will understand all of that goes on, and if tweaks need to be made, they can be made. But at least seek advice and get a plan, get a path to follow on. And then you're not so worried about these sorts of things because you've got somebody else, as we said earlier, that's actually going to sponge all the information and just give you the bits you need, because who wants to sit through that and then read through the documents afterwards, really, unless it's your profession.
You do, don't you, Paul? You do.
Love it.
Yeah, it's Paul's favourite hobby, but most other people have got other things they want to do with their lives.
I mean, the rabbits out the hat from the speech itself are few and far between, because so much of it was leaked in advance and got the Chancellor into a bit of hot water, didn't it, in terms of the Commons procedural committee. But the one big one was the universal credit taper relief, which sort of gave the government a chance to hit back at some of their critics who were, you know, saying, look, you're not doing enough to look after the lowest paid, the people most in need. What were you expecting something like that?
I think there was always a chance that they were going to do something, and obviously a big message of the, you know, the budget and the, you know, was around, you know, people getting rewarded for work. So they're really aiming at those who are in work, who are claiming universal credit, and encouraging people on universal credit to get back into work by meaning that, you know, they're not going to lose as much money as a consequence of their universal credit as a consequence of actually getting out and earning. So, yeah, but I think the reality is that's only a proportion of those who are on universal credit. There'll be a lot of people on universal credit who'll be desperate to get a job and won't necessarily be able to find one. So I think, you know, that there is still, you know, a large chunk of those people who are going to suffer when the extra £20 a week, without the extra £20 a week. And I'm not convinced that the taper cut really goes far enough to support those people.
I can see you nodding at that one.
Well, the government's take on that is that is linking the £20 extra and the removal of that with the measures, you know, temporary measures like furlough, which of course has now gone. But once you've had something and then it's taken away from you, it's very difficult, isn't it? You know,
Absolutely.
so.
I mean, the Chancellor obviously wants to make it sound as if, you know, he's a spending Chancellor. It's almost like tax and spend is the thing that people associate with a Labour government. Do you think that, you know, Rishi Sunak is trying to steal the thunder of the opposition and give them nowhere to go here? What do you think?
Well, I think he's certainly ruffled a few feathers amongst some of his own backbenchers, hasn't he? Who are sort of concerned that they're moving towards being more of a tax and spend party. I think whether he's consciously trying to steal the opposition's clothes or whether he's, you know, he feels that this is the appropriate way to go, you kind of hope that it's rather, you know, more that he thinks this is the right answer rather than any political motivation. Yeah,
well, he had to go and speak with his backbenchers last night, didn't he? And say, no, I am interested in cutting taxes, although there is no evidence of it yesterday. I touched on that big stake point at the beginning. I think that's where we're creeping. I think the temperature's going to. We're like lobsters in a pot, and the temperature's going to slowly rise, isn't it, over the next few years? And if we get good growth, if we get better than forecasted growth, then it won't be quite so painful. But I think people will feel it more over the next few years, won't they? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure how many budgets or statements Mr. Sunak's got left. I think he's readying himself for a bigger position.
Well, I mean, he's thrown into it. He's certainly used up all of his best material, hasn't he? In the last 12 months, he's certainly had a lot to unleash in a relatively short space of time, hasn't he? I guess probably to wrap up then, folks, are you able to summarise this? Is this easy to say, right? Who are the main winners or losers from what we saw yesterday? Are there any?
Well, I think if you were a climate protester flying up to the COP23 summit and you were an English sparkling wine drinker, you'd be a winner, wouldn't you? But I go back to my point about the temperature's going to slightly rise, I think, for everybody as we move ahead. I think that the people on who are on the universal credit in work, they are going to be better than they thought they were. But generally speaking, I think as a whole, the tax take is going to go up. Our personal allowances are going to stay the same, aren't they?
Absolutely.
He could have done something with that,
Yeah,
but they are frozen for the next few years. So the temperature is going to go up for, I think, most people as a generality.
Yeah, and we'll feel the difference with the already mentioned the national insurance change, the increase it's going specifically to the health service. And that hasn't been felt yet because it's not come through. So that it's going to affect your net pay.
It's a percentage at the moment, isn't it? You don't actually see how it actually impacts on what you're bringing home, does it?
That's right, yeah. And it will affect employers as well as employees, and we'll be taking money out of the pot that's there to be allocated or spent or invested or reinvested in the business. And paid in wages.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think actually, we shouldn't forget the employers in this sort of scenario. So, fantastic that the minimum wage is going up to £9.50 an hour, but that's a cost that employers are going to have to bear on top of rising costs for everything from fuel to heat and light to just their basic raw materials and products that they're looking to sell. on top of which is the increase in the national insurance that's coming. So I don't think there was a great deal in there that's going to give many employers a great deal of comfort in terms of, you know, how they're going to manage the costs of their workforce into the future.
And you've teed us up perfectly for the comment that we had on social media saying exactly that from Kelly, who said, let's spare a thought for our employers in this. They've got to shoulder the rise in the national minimum wage, and there's only a certain amount they can soak up before they have to pass it on to the consumer. And what does that mean for inflation? Question mark.
Yeah,
And
that's on top of things that sort of come out. So things like the auto enrolment requirements for everybody. Every employer had to pay a minimum amount into someone's pension, and those amounts have gone up over previous years now, from 2014 when it was introduced. So there are lots of things like that. We talk about stealth tax and other things that come out of a business's profitability. That's all part of it, isn't it?
Absolutely. Massive jigsaw puzzle, as we said. Gentlemen, thank you so much, Edward, Paul, Nick, for being our budget panel. We've covered a fair few ground there, bit of ground, haven't we? So